just bear with us as David prepares his slides. David, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick, and my real pleasure to be here. And I'm going to talk to you from the twin perspectives of currently an educational services provider, Oxford International, where I'm Chief Development Officer, works alongside universities on a global basis to basically develop pathways into universities. That includes embedded college pathways, but also digital pathways and other activities. And I will take a few moments, if you don't mind, at some point, well into my talk, just to talk about the future of those sorts of public-private partnerships as part of the strategic development of the sector. A lot of you will know, because I've been very active on various forms of media, that I was until recently Deputy Vice Chancellor International at Coventry, which set its cap at... Sorry, that's very kind of you. It's a great thing about higher education. It's always a learning experience. Speaking to the microphone. Thank you very much. Okay. So we set our cap when I joined it in 2008 at being the international university. At that point, we wanted to be the the modern university equivalent of Nottingham, which at that point had created quite rightly a global reputation for being internationally engaged. And I wanted us to match that amongst the new universities. I think by the time I left, because of the great activity, the great buy-in there was across the university and the clear strategy, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, not Coventry's strategy, but the need for a coherent and compelling international strategy, that we had become arguably the UK's most global university. And I'll talk a little bit about understanding what that means. I attended yesterday and we heard a great deal about strategy and ambition. Fantastic. But the point then is, what do you do about it? And I'm going to talk about some of the constraints, the limitations, the challenges that universities face, some of which they know. So a bit like Donald Rumsfeld, we've got our known strategic challenges. We've got our known unknowns. So we know there's some really scary stuff out there. And there's some other stuff that we don't even know about yet, which is also going to be challenging. So let me not dwell too much. Okay, so the world has changed, and I'm not going to talk about COVID and the challenges and the great way in which the sector responded. I'm going to actually talk to you about the subtle but significant ways in which some of the things that the historic behaviors are no longer part and parcel of how students engage with universities, how universities engage with their staff, how universities engage with their stakeholders. Now, we have not seen that play through. We are still in, sadly, COVID engagement mode. And that's not to dismiss the challenge that provided to us all as universities and as societies, but we have to move out of that to embrace a post-COVID future. And the longer we lock ourselves into some of those behaviors and fail to recognize that the world has changed and continue to hope that we can return to life before COVID, the longer we will defer our successful engagement with the new opportunities as well as some of the new challenges. And so the good news is I've got a lot of very dense slides. The bad news, so that's the bad news. The good news is I'm not going to read them out. Yeah, I'm going to do top line stuff as I've just done, and happy to take any questions at any point. Okay, so we have to respond to this, and the answer is not to go online. Okay, Coventry had an ideological commitment to online, an area where it actually had very little competence, where it's invested a lot of money, and that's a good thing. But what Coventry was fantastic at was giving overseas students, a lot of them, an absolutely world-class experience. We loved our students, we loved our partners, we loved our agents. There was a palpable sense of love on the Coventry campus. That doesn't translate into online. And whilst we used to listen to our students, the young people love technology, what COVID has told us is that Generation Z loves technology, but it doesn't love it in the classroom. Gen Z wants face-to-face. I'm sorry for the ideologues that don't want to hear that, for those people that got a lot of money invested in online. Clearly, and I know you heard from Coursera this morning, there's a lot of interesting stuff, but the future is not online. I'm sorry, guys, we've just got to get over it. And there are a number of other things here, which I'm, as I said before, true to my word, I'm not going to list out. You're here, you can read. Okay. I guess part of the story about COVID is it didn't really change, didn't change as much as we thought. What it did was reveal and accelerate a lot of changes that had been evident for those who could see them, or those who, where we look back with the benefit of hindsight, had been unfolding for a decade. There are now also resurgent a lot of the macro drivers. I mean, I've been putting this slide up for 15 years, that continue to drive behaviors, markets, and should be driving changes in the way in which higher education engages with the world. And you know, foremost amongst those is the world is going east and south. That is where the population is. It's where affordability is opening up. Okay, there is no point us sitting here cherishing our centres of excellence and expecting the world to beat a path to us. And I will talk a little bit in a minute about changing education markets. But we have to find a way to engage with these people, both because it's a source of revenue that is going to be essential to enable us to fulfill our ambitions as institutions, but also because that is what universities do. We are about widening participation, not in the narrow UK sense, but in terms of opening up access to education so that we can become more economically and socially successful. We know that. What we don't always then think about is, given that big grandiose claim, what does that mean in terms of what individual institutions do? And it means they have to be where the people are. Anyway, and there's a whole raft of other changes, which again, I'm not going to go through. Okay, so I could stop after this slide and you could just ask me questions. This is going to be the rest of my talk, which I'm going to go through at the rate of knots. Okay, so these are not necessarily the views of Oxford International, I should say. These are my own personal views, and I'm just going to go through these and evidence them. Now, if you don't agree, that would be an interesting debate for us to have. I'm going to show you why I think this is absolutely the case. Okay, so first thing is, COVID changed nothing. Yeah, so here's demand for higher education, you know, from IDP. So this is future-looking demand. This is what kids are going to do 18 months, 2 years from now. Yeah, the US is a bit more popular because we've lost Donald Trump. You know, Canada remains popular because of its migration policies. Australia's coming back, world-class education system, lovely weather, no surprise there. So why are you saying things are going to change, David? Okay, so first, really horrible slide. I'm sorry, and I will tidy it up for future discussions. Okay, so top left here, that is how the proportion of internationally mobile students around the world. So this is not UK data, so that's global data. Okay, so the cake gets bigger, yeah? So the problem is, if you look bottom left, the slice of the cake that traditional destinations get is getting smaller. Now, it's not rapidly diminishing. Bottom right shows you the change that's happened since 1998, and you know, you could say that's in the noise. But then what isn't in these figures is top right, okay? China. Now, we all think that the UK and other traditional destinations have weaned themselves off of China because we've replaced it by India. And I mean, there's another thing that I will talk about, substituting dependence on one massive market for dependence on another massive market. China has a declared intention to become a net importer of students. One of the last things I did in Coventry was to set up a campus in Hainan, which is like the Chinese San Diego. Okay, fantastic weather, beautiful beaches. It is a fantastic place that's going to be the site of a massive free port, where China is determined to create an entirely new model of new economic and social development through planned economy involving higher education and development of knowledge-based industries. But that's happening in 4 or 5 other places across China in a very systematic way, as well as there continues to be a massive growth in joint colleges. They're coming back to new universities. The whole system is internationalizing, and we can debate whether the extent to which the alignment of China in the current geopolitical climate might reduce people's enthusiasm to go to China. Equally, when you look at the research stats, you look at the infrastructure, you look at the fact that you can get a world-class education for a fraction of the cost in the West, that's going to appeal to a lot of people. We see then also the development of transnational education. I mentioned that earlier. We're seeing many more campuses being established. We're seeing much more attention to regional hubs rather than going long haul. All of that is beginning to chip away at the interest or the demand from those big markets at coming to places like UK, US, Australia and the like. And one of the big questions I think for this audience will be, to what extent will the Middle East become a regional higher education hub? I mean, there are some stats I didn't show around the massive growth in the numbers of students in Dubai. Coventry also had a partnership in Oman. We know there are many centres, and of course, depending on where you want to put Turkey, that's also becoming a major higher education destination. So these are UK stats, okay, to exemplify a broader issue about brand. Okay, we know that, yeah? We see it in everything in our life. The world splits in 2 ways, yeah? People go for brand or people go for cost, yeah? You've got different views about what is your most important utility. So why are we surprised that that's happening in higher education? And when we talk about utility, I think I'm talking primarily about employability, and I'll show you the stats for that in a minute, okay? Now, it's not only the big university, big research intensives that are growing, though we can see here nothing comes close in terms of the acceleration in the rate of growth. And that little plateau at the top is obviously what happened when COVID struck. But the grey line is the rise more recently, particularly in South Asia, of teaching-focused universities, institutions like Coventry, where they are absolutely piling in postgraduate master's students. And I'll talk a little bit in a minute, may even be the next slide. Okay, so they have a clear proposition that plays into what students want. That leaves a large part of the sector, long-standing, diffuse, comprehensive universities and small specialist institutions with nowhere to go unless they think very hard about that. And so, although this is UK stats, this represents a global phenomenon. This is my most horrible slide, okay, and I really apologize for it. Okay, so top left, okay, so the grey line is undergraduate numbers, again in the UK. The orange line is postgraduate numbers, okay? So I'm just trying to show how once upon a time we had roughly equivalent numbers, proportions of undergraduate and postgraduate numbers, okay? We then saw growth in undergraduate numbers, primarily driven by China, but with the resurgence of India, and that picture is replicated in America, Australia, and to a large part, continental Europe as well, okay? Now, the problem with that is that seriously undermines or seriously increases the cost of acquisition. Those students only stop with you for 1 year. There are significant implications for that, though the good news, of course, is that it talks to the sector's ability to support knowledge development within economic industry and broader industry, where we're clearly turning out people with the advanced degrees that are going to power forwards economic development. Bottom left, okay, shows you again UK stats, but it would be the same for America and Australia. Massive reliance on two countries, and it's not quite as horrible as I feared. But on the right there, this is Coventry data, okay? And we were very aggressive. Yeah, we had 15,000 overseas students, so we basically hoovered up any students that we had any realistic chance of recruiting. And what that does then is show you the sort of size of markets. So the point here is we can talk about diversity. I heard a lot about it yesterday in my time, limited time here. But where does it come from? The growing student segments are postgraduate. There's nowhere to go in terms of volume other than the places we already are. Okay, so how does an institution that talks about academic, financial, and operational diversity actually make that happen? Now, there is an answer to that, part of which involves working with Oxford International. Employability. Okay, so we take rightly great pride in the quality of UK higher education. Again, it was something we heard about a lot yesterday. Okay, but depending on the market, and this is aggregate, market data, showing how important these different parameters are for people that come through IDP Connect. So this is not just UK data. This is primarily, it's those big traditional recruiting countries, okay? It is not all about quality. There is an increasing segment of the market that is interested in employability. And who wants to put their hand up and say that they do a good job in the employability arena? I mean, we tried hard in Coventry for both domestic and international students. We guaranteed every overseas student that wanted it work experience, but actually most of them didn't want work experience in the UK. What they wanted, and in fact increasingly our UK students, wanted to work experience overseas in the dynamic Asian economies or in the Middle East. So where is that happening? Where, and this I'm afraid is a constant refrain, is where do we take our rhetoric and identify ways in which we can turn that into some sort of reality? TNE. So I love TNE. It was my passion in Coventry. Coventry was the largest provider of TNE, probably in the world actually, apart from those people that do online. So when I left, we had 25,000 students on a massive number of courses, okay? And actually there are more students on TNE programs in the UK than there are overseas students in the UK. It's not that different in America, although the sort of TNE they do is very different. I did it because I believed in access, because you can't claim to be a global university unless you're globally engaged, and that means being in your countries, okay, understanding what they want, feeding into the talent development needs I mentioned earlier. We had a fantastic partnership with Emirates Aviation University. We had a big partnership with Middle East College in Oman. We understood the importance of the Middle East. We tried in Turkey, then sadly that didn't work. Okay. But there is very little, okay, so there are a lot of people involved in this. I mean, even the Oxford institutions do TNE, but it just does not have the purchase in the UK or in Australia that it needs. And one reason for that is that the financial returns are very modest. I mean, I could not get Coventry to cost it properly. They would only ever cost it on a marginal basis, and even then it didn't make very much money. So the key then is how do you get the fees up, because doing that allows you to add more value. But we need some new models, some radical new thinking about how we industrialize access to higher education in places where they cannot afford the very significant costs. And you'll remember perhaps on my first slide that one of our big problems in the UK specifically, but in the West generally, is that we have become very expensive, not just in terms of fees, but then living costs and your visa and your medical care and this and that. And there has been an assumption that this is a price inelastic business. Is that right? Anyway, but it doesn't matter how much you charge kids, they'll keep coming. And we got to the point where that is clearly no longer the case. And I moved away from the microphone. I apologize for that. You can tell me that. Okay, so digital transformation. It's not online teaching, okay? How much more can you do in online teaching? And of course, Sarah's doing great, FutureLearn, you know, we're working with people called Engagely. Okay, there's a great deal of stuff there. Where is the effort to digitize the university? When I left Coventry, one of its major challenges, for which I was not responsible, was it couldn't allocate rooms cost effectively. I see some of you smiling. Yeah, so don't talk to me about the digitization of the university until you've got a proper room booking system, yeah? That you know what your staff are doing. I mean, Coventry has spent a lot of money on putting in a CRM, yeah? I mean, so, you know, we started that in the international office, okay? So where is that? Where is the digital core that you would expect to see that if you went to any business? I mean, if I go to get my car serviced, that's now a digital business, yeah, because they got a CRM system, they run, my car gets digitally analyzed, you know, the whole thing is systematized. Yeah, somebody unbolts something and then bolts something else on, but all on the basis of a business that is digital to its core. And we are simply nowhere in universities. And moving on to that, so the bit that we control, we've failed at, okay? The bit that we don't control, where the market controls it, has been driven, okay? There has been this massive increase in ed tech in the pre-matriculation journey. This is organizations that will assist universities in accessing students, one of whom is Oxford International. And this data, so basically, if you go to an agent nowadays, a student, they will source something like 500 pieces of data about you. Yeah, and we know that. You buy 6 things on Amazon, other electronic vendors are available, and they basically know 80% about you. So you have this incredible data-rich environment within these companies, and they are using that quite rightly to help universities and students to better match with one another. Now, part of the problem is that, again, we all say that, but we also know that the problem with these algorithms, unless they're really, really clever, and we don't have any in higher education yet, is that it tells you to do the thing that the last 6 people like you did. So actually, you could say it's a way of entrenching disadvantage, because if I'm a disadvantaged student from Cheltenham, probably aren't any, but you know, it'll tell me to go to the same place that all the other people did. And if they were in the past, then it's likely that they weren't making optimal decisions. It is also an area where we need to be careful that the luster of ed tech doesn't befuddle our brains to the reality of what happens behind. But ultimately, this is where Gen Z wants to be, because I'll talk a little bit later in a minute about, you know, one of my big 10 drivers being the pavers of Gen Z. Okay, they like data. They want self-actualization. They like the hyper-personalization that comes from this sort of process. This is now big business. And I guess, I don't know, there's probably not very many people who are engaged in the day-to-day business of international recruitment here. This is my world, okay, or used to be my world. So basically this defines the ways in which we engage with students, from exciting their interest at the top of the funnel, as we call it, down to, you know, crystallizing their involvement at a particular institution. And what I did this for a PI event with Nick's colleagues, and I was trying to identify who were the key players. How did you stratify, segment the funnel? And what I've put on the left here is the different sorts of services, and this is not exhaustive, that are being provided to universities and to students. And the problem is, at the moment, there aren't performance metrics. Nobody really knows who's doing a good job. Actually, sometimes people don't know how people are doing a job. Okay, there's no, And so people are having to educate themselves. Part of my passion while I worked with the PI was to try and help the sector to educate itself, and actually also to give a platform to these companies so that they could tell us more about what went on, what was the reality of artificial intelligence in terms of helping use this data in a meaningful way. And the answer was not very much. But this is an absolutely magical transformation to the way in which people find their ways into universities. And this is where, this is where we are in this space. So as I mentioned, Oxford International. So we provide embedded colleges. So basically we will run foundation programs for students. They can come to us for a semester or for a year, and we will provide them with the academic and language skills in order to succeed at universities. With COVID, we made a rapid tilt to online, and so we have a whole raft of online and blended programs, a number of those blended programs increasingly being delivered offshore in markets. So I am at least true to my own rhetoric, which is to be where the people are. And then more recently, I've founded this educational services division that will basically do whatever universities want. So our point is to start with, what do you need? Not, I've got this thing here I've made, would you like to buy it? But what do you want? And is it about quality? Is it quantity? Is it, if we go back to the diversity mix, tell us the sorts of portfolio that you want. Do you want more engineers? Do you want more undergraduate students? Do you want more people from a particular territory? And we will find ways of doing that. And I've put, okay, so I didn't explain this slide very well. I'm doing all right. Okay, so it's supposed to be the dark clouds gathering, yeah? And there's some really significant challenges. Okay, and one of my earlier slides talked about those challenges, culture wars, the compliance burden. In Coventry, I mean, it came from the legal department, so I'm not sure I quite believed it, but they said we had some, so I think it was about job creation, but they said we had 70 regulators in our university. I mean, universities are very, very complex, and I can tell you why that's true, not because I'm making a case for university exceptionalism, but if you go to auditors, and they're the people that will always tell you the truth because they have to justify their fees. The audit fees for a university are 10 times that of the most similar organisation of similar size. So basically, if you take University College London and you take University College Hospital London, sorry to use a UK analogy, but these are roughly the same size, the audit fees for the university are 10 times. So there's my measure of complexity, objective, separate. And so universities need to find, what have I got? I'm nearly there, actually.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
Okay, so.
It's just staying next to the microphone.
Okay, right.
There's some comments.
Fine, you should have nailed my feet to the floor. Okay, so anyway, so the point is, as I put on my previous slide, okay, we know the 3 commercial solutions are, you can buy it, you can build it, or you can develop a partnership, okay? Universities like to build it, okay? They can no longer, do not have the bandwidth, and they will soon not have the money to buy it. Nobody should be, sorry, to build it. Nobody should be building their own online platform. We know that, okay? Okay, you probably shouldn't be buying it because it's going to be very expensive. You need to develop these things in partnership. Okay, and that's where we come in. Okay. Gen Z students. Now, I don't know, not seeing any Gen Z students in the room, so I can probably get away with saying anything here. This actually is evidence from people with bigger brains than me. Okay, so probably know all of this stuff. I just want to reiterate the point, okay? The thing that the COVID pandemic taught us, because students didn't come when they couldn't get a face-to-face experience, okay? Online, it has a purpose. We are online, we do blended, but do not think that simply the future of higher education is online, because it's not, and those people that try to do that, unless they are specialist providers, will get caught out, because we have to recognize what these students want, and they are much more fluid in their choices. At one level, very specifically related to markets, they will apply for many different countries, more different sorts of universities. I mean, in the past, they used to pick a country, pick a small group of universities. They're much more eclectic and fluid these days. This is my last slide, I think. Okay, so I'm being maybe a bit harsh on my colleagues. Okay, there are clearly some universities that know exactly what they're doing in the international space. And say in Coventry, we built that university where half of the revenue came from international engagement of one form or another, through a very coherent and compelling engagement with it. And not just recruitment, we had the world's largest global enhancement program. We were responsible for 25% of all the UK's outbound mobility. We had 7,000 students on internationalized curricular programs. Okay, we had 47 different languages on offer on a peer-to-peer basis. And there are other people doing that and other people coming. Okay. But unless we recognize that our rhetoric is exactly that, not our reality, we will not move forwards. We have to move forwards. This is what Gen Z wants. It was particularly what students in Coventry wanted. They wanted access to a global gateway. It will be the same for kids in Accra, in Delhi, in Shanghai. They want the university they choose to open up their opportunities. And the last thing I will say, picking up something that I discussed with Nick earlier, is that at the turn of the century, we saw a flowering of international institutional networks. There was a recognition that we'd had the age of the individual researcher, we'd had the age of group researchers, okay, that the 21st century was going to be about institutions coming together in networks. In fact, one of the earlier speakers was from the European Universities Association. That got put on hold before COVID, because those networks are actually very difficult to make work. But that will be the future. And I remain quite optimistic that, given the sector's ability to work together on an international basis, we will see a platform for innovation develop, where people are mitigating the risks and maximizing the benefits through working together. So thank you very much indeed.
David, thank you so much. Whilst we've got you here, we would love to ask some questions. There's definitely some coming through online, and we can take some from around the room. There's a quick one here online, which is just clarifying the difference between TNE and full-time international student recruitment, and why TNE is less profitable.
Okay, so TNE is acquiring an award in a country other than where the university sits. So that's a two-form. So it may be that you start in a country overseas and end up spending a year or two in the country of the university that gives you the award. Those are called articulations. The other area is collaborative delivery. That's where people like me would go to Oman or Dubai, and we would teach the program, or we would teach teachers in our partner universities there to deliver the program, and they would get a Coventry University award. So why is it not so expensive? Because it's not as valued. Yeah. So it's I mean, not that I buy very many Prada handbags, but it's around where is the value seen, and there are a lot of costs associated with UK delivery, and people can recognise that those costs need to be met. People don't have the same value, and indeed there aren't quite the same costs for collaborative delivery. But it's not something that is driven by fundamental economics. It's as driven as much by perception as anything.
Okay, and another question about the future of TNE around the kind of geopolitics that we're seeing, global war, the pandemic, and the impact on global economies. Do you see that as a major disruptor?
Sure. So the concern in the world about travel and well-being and everything is making some people think harder about stopping in their own country. For some, it's actually about safe harbor, that they want to get out of those regions and go to places that are safer, which is for the most part those traditional higher education destinations. I think mostly it is going to be driven by cost and utility. You know, it's 1/10 of the price, and you don't have to leave home. You can, and certainly in some places like China, you know, if you remain in China studying a degree that comes from a UK university, you have the benefits of 5 years of networking, yeah? And you no longer have a salary premium. So up until about 5 years ago, a Chinese student that went to study overseas could expect a healthy premium when they return. That's gone. So why would you not stop in China, not leave your family, stay with your mates, build your networks, get yourself an internship, and you've got a degree.
Thank you. And we have a question, a couple of questions in the room.
About the totality of our being in terms of collective intelligence. I'm just wondering, you spoke about inclusion, equality, and so forth, and then to deliver equity for access, experience, and outcome of, you know, being able to experience shared knowledge in our society to that degree is something that we have to look at. How does that mirror society itself? So one of the questions for me that is very important, that we have to go into a transformation process where the content itself reflects the diversity of society. The style of teaching, the methodologies of engaging with the knowledge and communicating knowledge is one that is much more inclusive and democratic. So in that sense, I was just wondering, that multicultural aspect that you spoke about, you know, cooperation, collaborations, diversity, do we have a methodology to actually assess the rate? Because I do remember The Guardian from time to time just keep talking about the inequality in terms of gender, that women with the same number of papers at university, the same publications, the same number of, you know, input classes and so far and less, and that has not changed. So what measures can we have for monitoring that can be also organizing to auditors, regulation, and a way of speeding up the process? Because even environmental issues, we deal in a way that with the knowledge we have at university, but sometimes indigenous people, Aboriginal people, they have a lot of wonderful know-how that is not distributed because of that inequality. So what's the plan for that?
Sure. So I guess if I talk about the process in Coventry, so one of the reasons we did TNE was to be able to import back into Coventry opportunities to internationalize our curriculum and to make it more relevant globally, and to expose our students to people who were in those territories, not who were reporting on them or might have been in there 10 years ago. And I did say that TNE is an important way of addressing those issues of inequity. And indeed wider sustainability. I mean, you know, one of the reasons we're seeing research-intensive universities start getting interested in TNE is it starts to reduce the carbon load associated with the delivery of higher education. I mean, as to those wider issues around, I mean, most universities are embracing at least gender issues. As big institutions in the UK, we have to report on how diverse we are, and there are benchmarks established. We're work in progress. Sorry, I can't be more positive than that.
Yep. Hi, David. John Phillips here. Been in the pathway sector for the last 10 years. Thank you very much for the whistle-stop tour of the macro trends in the sector. Much appreciated. I'd just like to get your thoughts on what seems to be quite a common government response from the English-speaking education exporters to deal with the post-pandemic recruitment environment, which is to really open up the migration route a lot more generously. The UK, of course, and I think now we're seeing New Zealand coming out with a very generous migration, post-study migration route. That will appeal to certain markets, not others. It smacks of a certain desperation to me, but I'm just wondering, what do you think is the long-term implications of that approach from the English-speaking countries?
Well, I guess I won't talk about the philosophy of that, or the sort of the policy, other than most of those countries, those traditional destinations are aging. And so I think whilst, as you say, there is a sort of tactical element about sustaining international student recruitment, it does reflect a real concern about where the workforce of the future is going to come from. As you rightly say, it doesn't work across all markets to the same extent. I think my bigger concern is that we see that as the answer to the broader challenges of increasing lack of diversity. And actually, when we feel we've got these blunt instruments, people then don't engage with the deeper strategic challenges. And I'm rather concerned that there's a bit of complacency in the sector. Yeah, where currently the UK is doing very well. We're chock-a-block of one-year South Asian students, most of whom will actually go back. Okay, so where is the strategy that takes us past that? And I don't see any forward thinking about that particular challenge.
Thank you very much. A very good delivery just made. Probably just 3 short questions. One is, you've been involved in education for probably more than 3 decades.
So I think
You've probably been in education for more than 3 decades, promoting education.
Yeah.
And you internationalize education.
Yeah.
But however, most education you take to maybe developing countries are not meant for development of those countries.
Well, you're quite right that part of our problem in the UK is that we try and put down in these overseas territories a pure and unsullied view of what is best quality education, and that we should be taking much more advantage of the intellectual assets that are in these countries, that we should be not looking for something that is equivalent in nature, but equivalent in outcomes.
So you should believe that we should be helping the developing countries to look at their problems, the challenges they have, and how to be able to ensure that we don't just import our own education in the West and into them, which is probably...
Yeah, I mean, there is a sort of practical element about the proven efficacy of the Western model, at least, and I guess to some extent, the extent that the Western model has been replicated in the East, that I think has some value. There's a way of working, but I agree with you that we should be engaged much more in capacity building that is relevant to the local context.
So we'll be glad to work with you on that. Second question. You believe that, I asked the question, what is the failure of education for sustainable development?
Well, I think the failure is a systemic failure, which is that we collectively, I mean, I don't think I'm not going to admit to a Western failure. We are collectively not realizing the potential of the young people. You know, people talk about the war for talent. There is no war for talent. Talent is not limited. Yeah? We have to find ways to develop and reveal the talent. Now, I don't want to get into the rhetoric and the sort of highfalutin philosophy that I heard yesterday, but there is a problem there that we need to fix, and that means what is the practical solution to that? And I don't know what that is. I mean, more imaginative approaches to transnational education should sit there. Now, one of the problems with TNE is that a lot of people in the developing world see this as an exploitative model, that people in the West do it for the money. And actually, I was always consistent in Coventry. We didn't do it for the money. In fact, the reality is you don't make very much money. Those people who think who do it for the money are sadly deluding themselves because they're not making any money. But we haven't got the models that will allow us to match the capacity and capability that has been developed in a number of places, not just traditional centres of excellence, to the operating dynamic in other countries. And I'm not the person, that's a question for Davos, I think, not for...
Thank you. And lastly, is it possible, or do you think it's not possible at all, for the fact that we've been following a system that has not been highly productive? Because even in your speech, you've mentioned about the issue of poverty, even within university, where even education becomes very expensive. And so a lot of young people go into debts before they even leave university. And by the time they come out of university, they probably go and look for jobs 15 times. And every time they're going, they're borrowing money to be able to look smart and to drive to the place looking for a job. And eventually what happens? 30 days before they get paid. That's slavery. Nobody's looking at that all over the world. Nobody's looking at that. And then you can even sack them within 6 months with no excuse. That is even in the labor force. So there's a lot of, when you talk about human rights, so you see what is happening to our young people, that most of them will never leave poverty through their life. These are things we should be addressing if we are promoting education. And I would like to say, because you are promoting education for decades, and what kind of education are we promoting then? So if we can look for people like you, an organization that we can sit together and change the face of education, because we all agree that there's poverty in the land. Even in the UK now, you know what it is. More people go into food banks. Yet we have thousands of educationists. We have universities, we have centers, we have researchers. What's happening to us? So, sir, I would like to work with you and see and other likely minds, and let's start changing for the future of our generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. David, thank you so much. Fantastic engagement online and in the room. Thank you so much for your time. We now